Scribner Road out there at the Four Corners, and you go up there. And, well, for a long time it was the end of the road, but I guess now they've opened the road back up.
I guess it doesn't look like
so you
it
can get up
used
to Logtown.
Yeah.
There's a lot of building up there.
Yeah.
But I think he probably knew Bill Borland.
Yeah.
Bill Borland lived in North Calais Village. Maybe they worked together.
Could be. Could very well be. Yeah. Let's see what Elliott remembers. Great evening.
Well, while everybody's waiting, there's a really great exhibit at the pavilion at the Vermont Historical Society, and it's Cross Crackers, which was in Montpelier way back, and George Edson, who's the descendant of the people who started that, put it together, and it's fascinating. It's like quite extensive, a lot of reading, and pictures of old Montpelier. So, and they're still made because the place was bought by, the business was bought by Vermont Country Store. And they bought the equipment, and they bought the baker. they took on the baker. So he's not alive anymore, but the son still keeps that all going. So.
Jeff, you remember going in there probably when we were in school, right?
Oh yeah, yep.
Into the Cross
candy.
Baking.
It was kind of a general bakery, wasn't it?
Well, there was a bakery
Well, it's bread
on one side,
yeah.
and then there was a sort of a candy shop on the other side. So we used to go in there after school, but that was in the front of the building where they'd done the baking stuff. You know, down there where City Center is.
Right.
Part of it.
Going in terms of hearing.
Can you all hear me? I'll speak loudly.
Okay. Thank you, Debbie.
So when I joined the board, I think 4 years ago, the building was 11 inches out of plumb, the planer shed was falling off the front, the foundation was giving way, and we had to raise some money to do some projects. So we raised some money and we took on a project in 1 year where we hired a timber framer to come in and re-level the building, fix all the bad joints and the bad structure of the building, and bring it back to its level and secure place. We also hired a stone group from, I think it was from Brattleboro?
It was from Danville, wasn't it?
Danville, I guess. I don't remember exactly where. So they came in and repaired the stone, the dry stone foundation underneath the mill, and they also built these retaining walls which weren't here before. That was just a sloping hillside that was eroding away. But in order to lift the building and straighten it up, they were afraid that the planer shed would just fall off on its own. So we actually tore it off. And 1 year we met a gentleman over in New Hampshire who currently runs a water-powered sawmill in Lancaster, New Hampshire.
Wow.
And he also does timber framing. So we hired him to actually cut the timber frame for that planer shed on his water-powered sawmill, and all of the roofing boards and the floorboards are all cut on a water-powered sawmill. He came over here and we raised the building up. A lot of us spent time doing the siding and the flooring.
How did we get the siding? We need to say.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Paul donated a bunch of local
Paul's
siding.
not hearing, even listening.
Paul, thank you for the siding. I'll point out which ones are yours. Every other one is, I think, Paul's on the siding. And we also got the standing seam roof donated by a Berry company, and a gentleman on West County Road put the roof on for us. So we've had a lot of volunteer help to do this.
Not this big roof, but the one on the
Just the new one.
yeah, on the planer shed, which you can't see from here, just the edge of it.
So we've spent some time cleaning up the works and essentially planning to hopefully realign it, because as the building settled, they readjusted all of the mechanisms to stay level so they could saw. But now they're 11 inches out of normal because we fixed the building, but we haven't fixed the works yet. So that's one of our projects, is to fix the works. We've been looking at a plan. So the other thing is right now the intake to the penstock, which is the big pipe that feeds the turbine wheel down below, is totally silted in. So the only way we can actually open and run water down to the turbine is to drain the pond and excavate around the entrance to the intake. And since we're going to do that, it doesn't make sense not to put in a new system there, because otherwise it'll just silt in again and we'll have the same problem. So we're going to put in what we call a riser. It's going to be like a concrete riser, so the water will come in over the top into it and then feed into the tube. So essentially we won't have a silting problem. We'll be able to open the gate to the penstock, hopefully as long as possible, as long as that doesn't become a swamp instead of a pond, which eventually it will. All ponds eventually become wetlands. The problem with thinking about digging the pond up so we have stored water is the state won't let us use the water. So essentially we have a permit to use the water that's run of river. So as the water flows over, we can only use the flow that's happening at any time of year. So right now there's literally nothing. In the spring there might be enough to open the penstock and use what's flowing from winter melt and storms and all the rest. But if we spent $30,000 or $40,000 to have stored water here, we can't use it, but the state is not letting us use it. So that essentially doesn't make sense to do it. When I first joined the board, we had a plan to dredge the whole pond and do all of this work. And then the state came in and said, well, you can only do it on the river. And part of that is they want this big flush of water going down the stream here and interrupting the habitat of trout and stuff down below, down by the town.
Down where this stream joins Pekin Brook.
Right.
There's supposedly spawning beds down there.
Right. So we're working, trying to get a contractor here to do this project, de-water the pond, put in the riser, make the connection. So it's just hard in this environment where trying to find something. We've had contacts with a couple of, a year ago we had bids put out for the whole project, and some of them were in the $300,000 because they didn't know what would happen to the dam if they de-watered, and we had a problem that we had to fix the dam. So we're scoping back, so we're just going to de-water the pond enough to put a riser in and make that connection. And we have funds right now for probably easily to be able to do that.
Great.
And the other thing we're hoping to do is the gentleman over in New Hampshire, Daniel Southworth, we hope to bring him back here and help us realign everything and get everything so we don't have experience. He has a lane sawmill just like this that he runs every day of the week. So we're hoping to get his expertise back over here to help us realign everything.
Everybody knows that the sawmill was made in Montpelier.
Right. It's a lane sawmill built in Montpelier. Right.
Where on the river, off
lane
Elm Street,
shops,
we
yeah,
could
the lane-
explain where it is.
Yeah, the old lane shops. Yeah, if you know what's called the old lane shops, that was the lane manufacturing location in Montpelier.
Hello? I didn't totally understand about the state's position. Is that about the spawning of the fish, right?
Yeah, it's about the
Or
fisheries.
it's about the fish?
Yeah, it's all about the fish.
A surge of water might affect the spawning beds. There's natural surges to some extent, but
Right.
I think they're concerned about.
But wouldn't
I mean-
that change every year based on moisture and rainfall and?
Yeah, but
So essentially, we applied for a permit to be able to use the waters here, and
Yeah.
that's what they ruled, from their information about what we do. We can probably in the future, once we have the riser and everything here, and we could use stored water, we may be able to go back to them and say, so it's historic, can we get permission to do it 3 times a year, and what time of year, or whatever. But that would then mean that we would want to think about creating more of a stored pool, because right now it's not very deep and there's not a lot of water here if we ran it. So we could probably cut 1 or 2 boards and say, thanks, that was great, it was wonderful. Right. There has been some talk about putting some kind of power in here, either electrical or engine power like it used to. Some of the board members are not happy with engines. They more want to have the quiet of electric, and we've had a lot of encouragement to do that, but there's no power here. The last pole is over there. And the other pole is up here. For a motor that would run this, you need three-phase power, which is all the way up there.
Wow.
It would cost tens of thousands of dollars to bring that power to here. And there's not this is the end of the line here, and they don't have enough power to bring it down one more pole to us to give us enough power. So essentially, it's a huge expense. We have talked about putting a generator on site and then feeding an electric motor, but we're running a motor there. Why not run a motor there? So those are the decisions that we're contemplating and talking about and haven't made any decisions on. So that's essentially where the mill stands today. I'll answer any
Toby,
questions.
is there a time of year when the tube would have to get put in? You said
Well, so we'd have to dewater the pond, so that doesn't matter when we could do that, because essentially you put a pump in and you drain the pond down, clean everything out. We have to find a base for the riser. We can't just sit in the mud, and so we have to dig down until we get to bedrock or
Wow.
ledge or whatever.
has anybody probed?
No, but the ledge shows pretty high up on, if you go on the other side of the wall, you can see where the ledge is, so.
Okay.
It's not that it's a big project, it just means we've got to find a time and a contractor to get it done. And, so that's on our project list to number one to do that.
Does it, like, would it work better, like this time of year in a drier summer? You've got less water to deal with, or?
Right, so you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining the flow if you were doing it in the spring, because the flow is really hard. You know, essentially when you dewater a pond and it empties out somewhere, you have to keep the flow going. So you have to take it from further away and pump it all the way over here. So when it's really low, there's not much stream flow that you have to maintain. So August or September would be the best time. And we're hoping to do that, but contractors are busy as heck, and we've had 2 or 3 people in here, and none of them has stepped up yet. So we'll get it done. It's just one of those things. There's plenty more to do.
It's been a long process.
But the reality is the building is secure for another 100 years. The foundation's been fixed. All of the structure has been fixed. The planer shed is brand new. The roof is good. No water damage will happen over the years. So the building itself will be here for a long time. Whether or not and how soon we get the operation to actually happen with water turning a saw blade cutting wood, that may be a year or 2 away. But that's the goal.
You mentioned the name Southworth. Is that the Garland Mill?
Yes,
But his name is Southworth, is that
I
correct?
believe so, yeah, Dana.
Okay. Garland was previous to them, must be?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
right.
Yeah, they're nice folks over there.
Oh, they're great, yeah. And I've been over there, and it's 4 times the size of this, and you go downstairs and there's so many belts, it's like, the building shakes when they're running the saw and all this stuff is going. If you ever get over there, it's a great place to stop in and see
Well worth it, yep.
old time. And when he's not running the mill, he's actually generating electricity. He uses the water to turn a turbine that then feeds electricity back into his system. Huh?
What town is this in?
Lancaster. Well, it's actually a little. You go to Lancaster and then it's up in the woods behind it. But if you go to Garland Mill online, you'll find the address and the phone number. And they're terrific people there, and they're happy for visitors.
Could your plans incorporate that too? The creation of electricity?
Well, the problem is we can't push a lot of water through here. So essentially, it's just.
I see, he's got
Water. And actually, one time I was there, it had rained. There had been a thunderstorm, and he literally had water coming up into the mill because there was so much water going down the stream that he had to take the boards out of the sluice and let water run over, not go through the mill because it was flooding the mill. So it's all about the thunder mill. So a thunderstorm makes it busy.
Yeah. And they're not under the same constraints that we feel under, in that this is an historic structure with an historic machine inside it.
Right. His isn't
they're-
working.
They're
His
using
isn't
they're
working.
still
So he
using
doesn't have any
the
of
lane
that.
saw, but they don't have any problem with a sophisticated turbine that feeds electricity back into the
But
grid.
the news on this being here for a long time is really good news.
Right, yeah.
Toby, I have a question.
Yep.
You mentioned that it at one time had gasoline and diesel power.
Yeah,
Do you
I
know
mean,
any-
Gail would know because she was here. We've heard about it. We don't have any pictures or any specific history, but I think in the 50s and onward, it had a power plant down in the bottom part of what was the shed, and it just drove the belt. And we certainly could do that. We could actually, and we've talked about it. There's just some members of the board that think it's it's historical and we shouldn't be putting a motor in there. And
What about if the motor was historical?
Pardon me?
What about if the motor, the gasoline motor was historical? Like the one lung thing?
Yeah, but probably that's not historical here, because whatever was here was probably in the 50s, so it's probably an old Jeep or a farm tractor motor or. You know,
I think
force-
Elliott Morse knows exactly what kind of an engine it was. It was.
Curious to know.
Yeah.
I think it was.
I mean, I think if we get to the point where everything works except water going through, we might get pushed to just put something in there for the time being to see how it runs and make it work so we can actually operate.
Well, that wouldn't be tremendously historical, though, would it? To have a gasoline engine, if there was one here for decades.
Yeah, and again, I don't have the exact history of when it was here, but I'm assuming it was. You couldn't run a business on whether it rained or not. And so somebody said, okay, we're farmers, we're from Vermont, what do we got that can turn the mill? And they put something in there. But
Probably-
again, Elliott probably has some history of what it was, so he can tell you when he gets here because I think during World War II they made railroad ties for the railroads that they were building across the country for moving troops and stuff. And in order to do that, they can't rely on just water. So I'm thinking, even in the 40s, it was powered by an engine of some sort. Although we don't have any pictures or any other historical data that can tell us exactly. We're just speculating because the big pulley is underneath where that pulley as you see on the deck. There's a big pulley underneath, and that would be ideal to go right back to that deck of the planer shed, which we pretty much recreated the exact dimension of and the layout of.
Are we going to be able to go inside the building, or do we have to? Just curious. 'Cause I could take that. Oh, the rail is there.
Yeah, I just moved the rail out of there. Yeah, everybody can take a stroll through
Just be careful.
there. Yeah. Our liability is paid up for an unmanned building, so not an attractive nuisance.
So
Oh, sure.
unmanned.
Unmanned, yes.
Has anybody been, the East Montpelier used to have the Rally Day when they would have tours around Rally Day, and there was the Carol Badger Sawmill in East Montpelier, and the building's still there, but we toured the sawmill, which is probably smaller than this, but it hadn't been running for a long time, but it was the engine from a car or a truck was there.
1947 Cadillac.
And then the wires went up into the rafters to the radio.
Oh, yeah?
So he would run the radio from the car
Oh, yeah, from the battery.
in there. It was pretty amazing.
Now that was a 1947 Cadillac,
Yeah, like,
and that was an old rack, not the rack and pinion like the later models, but it was it was a rack and pinion like this one. So it dated back into 18. I think they came out with the Glover feed or something. In
right,
late
to change the way the carriage went, right, yeah.
Yeah, but he had that thing. He was a tinkerer,
Oh, sure.
and he set that up. He had that old Cadillac, set up that engine in there. You look at the feed lever in here, and then you look at the one that he had, and he had a little cable coming up there and a little knob on top. While he was working by himself, he was a single batch, and he would go up there and start sawing, and he'd saw off 2 or 3 boards, and then he would go and move the slabs and the boards and and what all. And then he'd come back, but all the time that thing's just idling.
That thing's what?
Idling.
Like a V8 gas Cadillac would. It was kind of neat to listen to. But then when he got ready to saw, instead of it being like you'd have on a diesel engine or something, which is full power all the time,
Oh, we had a throttle down.
he'd run that carriage up to so far from the saw, and then he'd idle it right up, you know, throttle it right up and feed the thing through. It was kind of fun to watch. I used to go in there and help him sometimes.
Oh.
He wouldn't trust very many people in there because if they weren't familiar with being in a mill, you know,
There's a lot
you don't want to
there's a
have
lot going
things
on
going
in
the
there.
wrong direction the wrong time.
That carriage goes back and forth really fast. and-
Yeah, belts
Particularly
come
on the
flying
return.
off if they're.
Well,
Whatever.
correct me if I'm wrong, Reed and Toby, but when this mill was originally built, it had an up and down saw.
Correct.
And supposedly the sawyer, he could like set the log in the motion going, go home and have lunch. You know, and the thing would just click, click,
Oh.
click, click, click for, you know, however long it took enough time just to work its way through the log.
Yeah, there's no way to tell what the date of this particular lane saw is. But they do go back quite a ways. And
The-
they were
the
still in
carriage, you
business
mean.
in the 50s.
You're talking about the carriage.
But yeah, the whole,
Yeah.
the saw mechanism.
Maybe 1870s.
Didn't they switch over to the circular blade 1870s somewhere in there?
Well, before that, I think. That doesn't mean that the switch here.
Oh, well, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Sawmills. You go way, way back, and they sawed their boards by hand. Well, of course, they used to split them out too,
Right.
but they had what was called a pit saw. Are we going to set up a pit saw here for
I mean,
demonstration?
dig a hole so some guy be in the bottom.
Well, no, you just had a raised deck,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and the
Right.
top sawyer was up on top of the
down
log,
below,
and the
right.
guy down underneath was.
Yep.
It can be hard to get help to run it.
Yeah.
Particularly
Well,
the guy
if
underneath.
I can be doing this while I'm working, I'll be okay. The younger generation.
If you've ever been to the fort at number 4 in Charleston, New Hampshire, they have a pit saw set up there. And I think Paul and one of our boys got to try it out one time. If you've never been there, it's a really fun place to go. It's kind of like a mini Sturbridge Village. And it was, I think number 4 was the name of the plot of land where it was established, and it was
fort.
pardon me? Yeah, it was a fort kind of thing. You know, and it was a safely enclosed community.
What town is that?
It's in Charlestown,
Charlestown.
New Hampshire. Right across from Springfield, I think. Exit 7 on 91. But it's a really fun place to go with, you know, anybody.
Well, back in the early 80s, I was building up in Walden, and I was buying lumber from a water-powered mill, which, if I recollect, was in Lower Cabot.
Headwater.
Yeah, it might have been. I can't quite remember.
Yeah. Chuck Clark.
What I do remember is it was water-powered, and I do remember the time I was there, he had gears, wooden gears with pegs, and the pegs were always breaking, and he was ready for it. He had new pegs, he got right on it.
So the
Put in new
shaft
pegs.
from the turbine that goes this way and meets the gear that goes this way
Exactly.
has wooden teeth,
Wood dowels.
dowel
basically.
teeth that drop
Dowels.
into a slot, and they're
Yep.
shaped and
They were dowels, and they would break,
Yep.
and he would just
Yep.
jump right on it, and he was ready for it.
we're all too old to get in there except me, but that's what's in there.
But while I was building, he closed down, so that would have been in '81, and it was a shame.
Now-
And out of teeth.
That was run by Dan
Davis.
Yeah,
Davis,
that's
right?
right. That's right. You
At
remember.
that point.
That's right.
But he bought that and set up a more modern setup just up on the slope,
Oh, we did.
on the slope above it. But I think that mill I don't know how long Chub Clark had it, but you know, you had different kinds of wood that you used that were tough enough
Yeah.
to deal with that. And when the old Lane Manufacturing down here had the auction, I don't know when this was. This must have been back in the early 70s. And I had a good friend who had spent his lifetime being a sawyer, and I took him down there, and he knew the whole place down there because he'd, you know, been doing business with Lane Mills for probably 40 years at that time. And he says, Paul, he says, come on over here and I'll show you the lignum vitae log. In one of the buildings had partially burned, but that log was so dense and it had a, you know, almost an oily texture, but it was just harder than the devil. And they had that log because they would cut out a little block for the mills that they had to repair that still had the old.
So in the turbine wheel on the bottom, there's a bearing, and the bearing was lignum vitae.
Yeah.
And Elliott
it.
was gone, and when they rebuilt the turbine, they put a hard plastic bearing in there. But there's another set of arms, there's another bearing up here that has 3 pieces of lignum vitae that's supposed to hold the shaft in place, and it's still there. The lignum vitae is still on the bearing shaft.
Self-lubricated.
Yep.
Does that
guess.
have a common name?
Pardon me?
Does that wood have a more common name?
I've only heard it lignum vitae.
There's an island in the Florida Keys, I think called Lignum Vitae Key, and it's a public park, I guess. But
Yeah, it's a tropical
you
wood.
can see the trees growing down there. Yeah, it's very tropical. It's nothing north of the Keys would survive.
I remember John, he says, I'm going to take that home, you know. So he bought this piece. Nobody else even knew what it was.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, the auctioneers didn't know anything about it and stuff. So John and I got enough help to load this thing, which was heavier than the devil, but we got it in the back of my truck. And we took it out to his place, and it sat out there quite a while, and I brought an old 2-man crosscut out there that I had. Actually, it was decent shape. But I'll tell you, that turned the points on that crosscut because it was so hard. So I never did. I wanted to get a piece off from that to hang
Never
on
got
to
through
it. And I never got all the way through it.
Yeah.
You know? But they figured out how to make things work without all the newfangled falderall that they got to have now. And they sawed an awful lot of lumber, those old mills.
I do have the DVD here. The last time it was run in '09, but the setting isn't. The only thing I can do is go down there, and if people want to take turns gathering around me, what is your pleasure?
Down in the dark corner of the mill, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been down there, and so.
That'll work.
How long is the DVD?
I'm sorry.
How long is it?
Yeah, about.
15 minutes.
We'll give everybody a crack at it.
Right.
So we can go down and,
Yeah, we're still in pictures.
you know. I'll start over. I've done it up as far as I can go. With the speaker, it's very Andy?
Yeah.
You want to see if you have high technology over here at Elliott.
Hi, Elliot.
I can hear your voice.
I don't know who the head is.
Looking good, isn't it? Yeah. Well, work's gone into it so far. A lot needs to go into it too.
So when this was running back in 2009, was that with water?
So, what do we think? Should we stop and then see what Elliott wants to say?
Imagine I was installing with water. Years ago. Yeah. Maybe a couple. We weren't about to put warehouses lumber out. No,
We've had some success with that, but then
a few lots.
a year later, they were all doing something else. So they come in,
We go back up there for those people to hear, please?
you know, let's take the whole
Would you
gang,
rather
sit
be
'em down.
here, Elliott? Where's the best place
I'll
to
do
talk?
whatever you like.
Meeting here.
No. I'd rather have you up on
Why
the
the-
desk. You're falling down, hurt yourself.
Whatever you like.
Let's go up there.
Okay.
Okay.
Sit down. You can
Yeah.
dance.
No.
Well, Elliot can talk and sit at the same
So
time.
you've told them what's going on as far as the
Yep.
stupid state of Vermont.
He didn't use those words.
I was more polite than you were, Elliot.
That's good, because you find yourself in jail if you say a word against.
I don't think we need a PA system for Elliott's point, so.
This is a goodie den.
Well, we're getting there. Let's get something together.
Well, when you get ready, give a holler. I even stopped to have my lunch when I came up here. I've been running all over the state.
Why is he leaving? What did you say?
He's a good guy. Yeah, he sure is.
No.
Seems pretty deep.
You want to hear what I have to say, Toby? Hey, that's good.
Okay, I'm sorry this is kind of disjointed, but does everybody know Elliott Morse?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, back in colonial times, most any stream or river in town had a sawmill or a grist mill, something powered by water power, because it was either water power or human power or animal power. And that's why people settled in Vermont. They were all looking for a way to manufacture things without using their bare hands. So that's how come this is here. There are many mills that were here. Down the Peak and Branch, there were about 4 different kinds of mills. There was one even up in Maple Corner, and they were short-lived ones. There was one at the outlet of Bliss Pond too. The name was right there, and that one was one that didn't last very long. But this one did. You can see there's still something standing, but because of a lot of hard work of different people, it is standing. Otherwise, I've seen pictures of it with the roof in the middle sagging right down about 3 feet. It was the people training to go overseas somewhere that camped up here and they fixed the mill up. Well, to start out where it all started out, Joel Robinson came from Rehoboth, Mass, which Rehoboth is not a very big place. It's It's almost into Rhode Island. It's almost at the edge of the ocean. And quite a few of the people that came to Kent's Corner came from Rehoboth. Joel Robinson, remember Kent? Remember Kent? Abdiel Kent and several others lived in Rehoboth. Apparently they all were good neighbors. And Joel would have stayed right there. He had a wife and he had, I think, 3 little kids. And probably he never would have come to Vermont and done anything. But he heard that this town was having a tax sale. I didn't even know they had taxes in 1803, but I guess they did. And I heard also, but I may be wrong and somebody could correct me, that he paid 15 shillings for this 3 acres and the rights to the water. If somebody can correct me, that may be right and it may be wrong. So Joel made the long trek from Rehoboth up here, probably about 275 miles. And can you imagine coming that far on trails, maybe not even trails? There was no highways, there was no interstate, there were no places to eat or sleep. And if he brought a horse or a mule, which sometimes they did, he would have to figure ways to feed himself, also to feed the animals. It's a hard thing to even think about, that all those things he had to do to reach Kent's Corner, Vermont. I'm not even sure it was called Kent's Corner then, but certainly it was pretty soon because the Kents moved in. And gosh, I guess I'm related to the Kents. I just found out the other day that my cousin Kent Morse, who just passed on, his name was named Kent because of his relationship to the Kents. So Joel arrived here and there was nothing but woods, and woods. And he set about building the mill, which most of the mills weren't built to do much except fall down after a few years. Apparently, he was a little a better thinker in those regards because he built this mill. And it looked about like this does right now, only it didn't have a nice roof like that. It had wooden shingles. So he built the mill. Now, it didn't have a saw in it like it does now. He built the saw. It was an up and down saw. It used to have saws that people would be at each end of the saw, down in a pit, and they'd move it up and down. This one, it was gearing powered by water that made it go up and down and up and down and up and down. They say that it was so darn slow that a farmer that owned the mill would set a log sawing, and it was so slow that he'd leave here, he'd go back to the farm, feed the cows, milk the cows, do anything he needed to do at the farm, and come back, and possibly it had sawed 1 board. Maybe not 2. That went on a long time. Joel went to the top of the hill beyond where Stanley Fitch's barn is, and he built a house for his family. It wasn't a log home. He probably used boards that he'd sawed here in the mill. And Stanley is about 100 years old, and he's not in good health, as well as his wife. But Stanley told me that he can remember seeing the house that Joel built up there. And when Stanley saw it, it was being used to store sawdust for the cows. It's gone now. There's not a trace of it. So when all that got done, Joel went back to Rehoboth, got his family, and painstakingly they came to Kent's Corner, Vermont, and lived in the house on the hill. So that went on quite a few years. Different people owned the mill. Some owned it because they thought they'd get rich. Others owned it because they wanted to own a mill. And then Abdiel Kent was one of the Kents from Kent's Corner. And Abdiel bought the mill. Well, he wanted it to do a quicker job of sawing lumber. So he went to Montpelier and he bought the Lane Sawmill, which the first ones were, that was in 1875. The first mills were manufactured about 1850. And he went to Barry, and he went to Smith, Whitcomb, and Cook, and he bought the wheel. It's a turbine, I guess, but in history jargon, you call it a wheel. And I know how the wheel works too because I've used it. And water goes in from the penstock, from the dam. Oh, and let me tell you, people get worried about the dam, that it might collapse, it might take out the houses down there. No. Well, that dam, first off, sits on ledge. In the very top of the ledge, they added some slate stone to make the water deeper. That dam will be there till the end of the world, as well as the one at Maple Corner. Some might disagree with me, but I'm true. I walked by that when I was in the first grade going to Maple Corner School, and it leaked just like it leaked now. So Abdiel bought that, and he went and he bought the wheel. He put it all together. He also made it so that he could saw logs which were longer. He had it so it would stick out above the water because they wanted to saw logs that could be used for erecting barns. They needed to be pretty long. And his dream came true. He was able to do that. And let's see. A few years before, my Uncle Bernard and I and a few others got the mill running again, I went to see Dennis Lane, who was a relative of Dennis Lane, Lane Manufacturing. And I had a nice visit with him. He was an old man, and probably he was about to die within a couple weeks. And he looked at me and he said, "Elliott, there's nobody that can get that mill running. Too much stuff has been thrown in the pond, stolen. Half of it's gone." And he looked real serious. And then he said, "Oh no, I shouldn't have said that to you." Because he said, "If there's only anyone that can do that, probably you can." Well, it wasn't just me. It was my Uncle Bernard. And I got him interested in it because, well, Joel Robinson is my great-great-great-great-grandfather. He was Bernard's great-great-great-grandfather. And so I went to Bernard and I said, "We can't let that mill just sit there. We have to do something with it." He had a machine shop. Very willingly, he took some of the pieces that had been thrown in the pond. He duplicated them with his machinery and his know-how, mostly his know-how, and put it all together. We spent days, maybe weeks here, and we put it together, and in one day we had it all ready to go. Because I need to tell you that before we announced we were going to run it, we tried it ourselves. Because we couldn't have a bitter failure that day. So we announced that we were going to saw with Joel Robinson's Sawmill. And that day, there were probably 200 people lining here watching. I counted 6 people in wheelchairs. 4 people. I saw from their eyes tears because they thought they'd never see the mill run again. The mill was, it went off nice. My Uncle Bernard pulled the lever and started the mill, and it sawed some logs quite nicely. What else can I think?
How many times did we run it after that?
Oh, probably 10.
Yeah.
Probably 10. We ran it until, and I won't really get into this much, but the people downstream gave us trouble because they said we put water down the stream. And I had the lady with her little babies came up the road one day, and I was sawing, and she stopped and angrily said, "You have a permit to run that mill?" I said, "Why, sure I do." Well, they didn't like the mill at all. Maybe I wouldn't if I lived down there too. So the mill was owned by many different people. And some of them owned it because they just wanted to own an old mill, fiddle around here a little bit. And others thought they might make a living, which it was impossible to make a living. Richard Lamphere, Bill Borland from North Calais, to name a couple that owned the mill.
Yeah, was there somebody named with the last name of Scribner?
Yeah.
That lived on Scribner Road up there?
Yeah, yeah.
Did he work with
He
Borland?
worked with Bill Borland.
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
we were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
That's kind of
And sometimes there wasn't enough water to use water power. So I remember they belted up, it was an old International truck engine, and they belted it up to the saw. And I don't remember where the engine was. I was just a little kid. But I don't think it was in line with the saw. I think there was a belt running from outdoors somewhere. And they also had another engine too that worked quite nicely. We've thought of using engines to run it now. We even thought of electric power, but to get electric power down here from the closest poles, it's just unthinkable. We can't do that. We have thought of gas engines, but gas engines tend to burn down buildings. I don't want to do that. So we've rebuilt everything. That part, probably Toby told you, we had to take down the planer shed, it's called, to do the work on the mill, the stabilization on the mill. But one person that really, really wanted it put back was Stanley Fitch. And how could anyone not do what Stanley wanted? Stanley is an icon.
he paid for about half of it. Too.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we won't forget Paul Cate.
And Paul Cate. Oh, Paul Cate has sawed lumber and helped out so many times. Anyone else I've left out? Please.
Those are the major.
Yeah. But
I'm curious about how it got deeded to the Aldrich Association.
Oh, yeah.
What was the last step before becoming a group?
I think it was deeded to the state. No, there wasn't. No. You know more about
Well,
that.
I don't know. There was.
I'm not good with deeds.
Where's
and
Gail?
things.
She's
There
right
was
there.
a Cooley family. They had a different maiden name there. Kent Cooley?
I don't know.
Who
No,
bought it?
there was a Kent.
Yes, Howard Kent. Howard Kent and his sister, my, the research that I've done, bought it, in the interim before,
Laura Kent Cooley, is that?
yeah,
is that
yes.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Howard's
And they
sister.
they donated it to a newly formed group, or a group that formed itself.
But once the
Right.
Aldriches owned it at one time.
I don't think so.
Pardon me?
The Aldriches?
No,
They didn't?
no,
No, they took an interest in
no.
it. They had quite an interest in it, but
See, they used to live over in that house over there, and,
Yeah. Yeah.
also he, in the wintertime, he would, keep the pond shoveled off and everything
Yeah.
so that we could skate on the pond.
But they never owned it and deeded it to,
No,
no, I think it was Laura Kent
no, it was
Cooley and
Howard.
Howard.
They were
Yeah.
brother and sister.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
they lived in Montpelier.
they could see that there wasn't going to be no one was going to be able to make her. So
then there's a Kent, but he's no relative from Chicago that's given us thousands and thousands of dollars,
yeah,
but
phenomenal.
he's not related.
Yeah, and basically they paid for a good bit of the stonework. And,
And he did come and
Repair the
visit
frame.
once. He came and
oh, he
visited
came twice.
twice.
We
So-
welcomed him like a hero.
So I guess that's all I have. Oh, let me tell you about my great-grandfather, Irvin Robinson. His name was Irvin. Most people, Irving. He was Irvin. And he farmed up on the hill in Calais, where I came from. And he owned the mill, because everybody wanted to own the mill. And he came down through here one day in his buggy behind the horse. And he came through Kent's Corner. He came by Gail's grandfather, John Graham's, and John came running out of the house and he said, Irving, come see the new baby that arrived in the night. Well, Irvin didn't like boy babies, girl babies. He wanted boys to help him on the farm. And he got halfway to the house and he said to John, boy or girl? John said, girl. Irvin said, in that case, I don't want to see it. He got right back in the buggy and came to the mill. My grandmother, there were 6 little girls in the Robinson family, and their father insisted that they, of course they didn't have child care then, that they all come to the mill while he ran the saw. And of course their mother helped him, and they hated it. I remember my grandmother saying, we just hated it. We were told we had to be good and hang around the mill. That's a little history. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Elliott.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm sorry we can't really do the video, I guess. I mean,
The lighting wasn't good.
huh?
The lighting wasn't good.
You could,
No, the sound.
The sound.
And we were trying to rig it up with this
Yeah,
machine, but
thought about putting it on YouTube?
the disadvantage, because we're where we are. If we were inside, we could do it, but sometime we'll show it.
Could I tell you one other thing? But I won't say any more after that.
Yeah, right.
During World War II, the biggest thing this mill did was to saw railroad ties for the war effort. And it worked good. The mill did a nice job. And in those days, it was like a railroad track made of wood that ran from the mill up to the edge of the woods. And they had a trolley on it to wheel the boards away from the mill. Also the logs, they skidded them in the winter because it was easier to skid logs on snow than on bare ground through the mud. And the logs were piled up sky high up where my truck is. And in the spring, when they had a lot of water, they called it a thunderstorm mill. Because they said, oh, we need a thunderstorm to produce enough water. And so they'd roll the logs right across here and down the spillway into the mill. So that's how they handled that.
So Elliot, from where you stand, can you kind of point to where all this would happen? I mean, it's a little hard for me to envision. I can picture a pile of logs.
Yeah, the logs were
Right.
there.
So say you had a log, then where would it go from here?
It would come right down around here. There'd be 2 logs across where the wall is. It would come right to the saw.
So like a ramp,
Yeah,
kind of
and
ramp.
they'd roll the logs right down and right into the mill. Unlike some mills where they floated the logs on the pond, they didn't do that here. They rolled them down.
Okay, thank you.
Prior to mills like this, in the early 1800s, there were small mills, like my property, which is between here and Adamant. Peter Wheelock had some property, which is now my property, and he was one of the first settlers, and he had a mill, if you will, down in the brook, which is now on my property. And it was just rudimentary. I mean, they were you know, making log cabins then. But that's why until ones like this came along, they weren't able to cut the boards to make the houses like ones around here in the old West Church and all of that. So it's goes back quite a lot of history.
One thing we might mention is the Peace Corps used the mill and the surrounding area as sort of a training venue, and I think it was in the late 1960s, maybe the early 1970s.
Yes, I wasn't here then, but
And basically, they were hosted by the Fitches up here, but they didn't, they were training to help people in Africa with development issues, and so they somehow got the idea that by reviving the mill here, they could simulate that kind of experience, and so they did. I think they did get it running with the engine for a while. And I think that Bill Borland helped them, because we have pictures of him with some of the Peace Corps volunteers. And so that was kind of an encampment of young people, some of whom knew what they were doing and some of whom didn't.
So Reed, how are most of the archival materials related to the mill being kept and where? So, I mean, you talk about having pictures.
Yeah. When I was treasurer, I maintained quite a file, and I passed that along to.
I was secretary at one point,
Yeah.
and they're in files.
Uh-huh.
I know where they are.
Yeah.
I'll just say that.
Sure.
I'm no longer, Elliott and I are no longer on the board.
I'm not
He
either.
isn't either. But we were for quite a while, so yeah, they're in safekeeping.
Uh-huh. Good.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, when I was a little kid here, believe it or not, the water went all the way back to the road.
Wow.
Why can't it now? Why can't it now? When the 2 wheels that link the wheel to the saw are about this big around, and they have wooden teeth. And when we started up, we omitted to think about how the water would float the teeth right out. And all the teeth went down the stream. And Bernard devised a way to saw out no teeth. And that's what's there now.
Yeah, we talked some about before you came, about the lignum vitae bearings.
Oh yeah, yeah. I pulled the wheel out. There's a name for the part in the middle of the wheel. They all have special historic names, and we lifted that out, and at the bottom of it was some rotten wood that blew away. It was lignum vitae, and they use lignum vitae as bearings in steamboats on the ocean, and it was the hardest wood in the world. It was like steel. I have a piece at home, but it's grown in Africa, and I didn't have time to go to Africa. So I went to Desiro's up in Barrie and got some high density plastic. And my Uncle Bernard put it in his lathe and turned the bearings out of high density plastic. That's what's there, but who's going to know, because you can't see it anyway. There was across the pond, there was a wood shop where people built wooden things, chairs and furniture, and Stanley Fitch remembers that. Gone now.
Stanley's father-in-law was one of the owners and operators of the mill, and his name was...
Whose father-in-law?
Stanley's. Matty? Oh, no,
No,
not father-in-law, grandfather.
Grandfather.
Parker.
Stanley's grandfather.
He was a Parker. Yes.
Parker.
So this...
Parker.
Right.
He owned it, and he had a planer going. The planer is down in the shed there, and he was planing lumber, and he standing over the planer, and he had a stroke, which they came and got him, and he was still alive, but they took him to his house, which is at the head of the pond,
It's still
and
there.
it was a fatal stroke. I remember him.
His name was Reuben Parker.
Reuben Parker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you remember him, Gail?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not that old. I'm old, but not
20 years old as Elliott.
1803.
They say.
No.
We're the same. We're the same.
Yes, we are.
And my cousin Kent, who was named because of the Kents, he was 83 too.
Remember, Kent.
And remember, Kent. Can you imagine somebody with the first name Remember?
Must have had a nickname.
I hope they called him Ren.
Quite a few different names.
Joel is buried up in the Robinson Cemetery. You turn in the road, and he's just a little bit to the right-hand side. His stone's on the ground that fell over.
That might be a nice place for another field trip sometime, to do the Robinson Cemetery.
There's an awful lot
If
of
anyone ever wants to do the nicest thing in the world, it's to see that his stone gets righted. But I already did it once and it broke.
There's an awful lot of history up in the Robinson Sawmill.
Cemetery.
I do more riding than walking now, but just recently I go up there and I just drive around, and every time, I swear, I see another family stone that I haven't noticed before. Of course I'm a history buff, so it's very interesting.
Gail and I can tell you a story on most everyone in that cemetery. In fact, we talk to those people a lot, but they're awfully silent.
Yeah.
But truthfully, you know and I know a good share of those people.
Or the families.
Or their families.
Yeah. Yes.
Some stories we wouldn't tell.
Yes.
Some we would.
Yes. Yeah, I won't bore you with yeah.
So Gail, is Reuben Parker, is there a crossing between the Fitches and the Parkers here?
Wait a minute. Yeah, because Stanley's mother
Don't go away.
was a Parker,
It's an ambulance.
married twice,
Matty Fitch was a Parker.
and related to Parkers in North Montpelier.
Related to Gladys Duncan, wasn't she a Parker?
I think so.
She was, yeah.
But that night that we were up there, Donna had mentioned she wasn't able to go that night. And I was walking around up there, and it was one of one of her Parker relatives up there. And I can remember when, what his first name, Parker, that ran the store in North Montpelier.
Arthur Parker owned the Blue Barn in Maple Corner.
That was, yes.
Yeah, he married a Parker, right? Did he marry a
No,
Parker?
No, his name was Arthur
No.
Parker.
Okay.
No, his-
And when farmers had to whitewash their stables to pass the inspector to send milk to Boston, Arthur Parker went around for Washington Electric Cola spraying whitewash on stables, and the whitewash thing turned and it went square in his face, and he was totally blind the rest of his life.
Oh, my.
Was he, was Reuben Parker his father?
I don't know.
Okay, but I understood that Christie was also a Parker.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so he's a Parker who married a Parker.
Yeah,
And she was Matty Fitch's sister.
yes,
So
you got it.
so Christie and Matty
Oh, thank you,
were
yeah.
brought up in that house
Yes,
here.
yes,
Reuben
yes.
was their father. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know how many people
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
know
no
all this, but
Yeah.
it's interesting to
Yeah.
me. Yeah. Okay.
Well, there's so much history
Yeah.
through this whole area. Everybody's related to everybody.
Either
In fact,
directly
you
or
and I are
indirectly.
related. Don't forget that.
Hmm?
You and I are related.
That's right.
Because my people stayed in
Nice to
Rehoboth.
see you both.
I didn't know until recently that we were related to the Kents, but I found out that Kent's name, Kent, is because of his relationship.
Reed, your family from Rehoboth too? No, when we're inside.
So there was a Robert.